Okay, good morning, everybody. Let's get started. I think there's still going to be a large amount of people coming in, but we really need to get going so we can hear from our distinguished guest. Thank you so much for coming to the breakfast session this morning. We're really thrilled to have Professor Tracey Bunda with us. She's the recipient of the 2024 AAUT Career Achievement Award. So huge congratulations to you, Tracey. And when we look at your bio and see the work you've done, we can see you've had an incredible career. So we're really lucky to have you with us today. And we're really thrilled to have you talking about the topic you're talking about, Indigenizing the curriculum and practical steps towards that. That's an area of huge interest, obviously, of the amount of registrations we've had and hugely important part of higher education as we go into this century. So thank you so much for being there.
Thank you.
Now, as we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this session from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, the people of the Adelaide Plains, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. I also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. I'd also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that you're joining us from today. And we certainly have people joining us from all around Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and we even have people from the Northern Hemisphere. And I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that you are joining us from today and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are attending today. So thanks very much. And without further ado, I will hand over to Professor Tracey Bunda from University of Queensland. And I think I will stop sharing, Tracey, and you can go ahead. Thank you very much for being there.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well, Tracey.
Okay, good. Hopefully then everybody else can hear me. Good morning, everybody. I'm so grateful to have been asked to do this presentation for you today. And I really appreciate everybody joining for a breakfast presentation. I'm not quite sure that I would do the same. I'm not an early morning person. All right, I'm going to share my slide presentation today. If for some reason there becomes a technical glitch, what I'll do is I'll come back to Stuart, but also online I have my colleague, Karen Shepherd. So if you hear me calling out to Stuart, Karen. All right.
Not a problem, Tracey. We run it pretty informally, so there is a lot of us, but it's really just a conversation, if that's okay.
All
And
right.
in that note, sorry, I forgot to mention that we have a Q&A window. I hope that you can see that. So throughout Tracey's presentation, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box. We won't interrupt Tracey as she's doing her presentation, but in the last 15 minutes of the presentation, I'll get to your questions. If you would like to go into that question box, and you can upvote your questions and we can ask the ones that are most popular and we can work through them. So I'll ask you to ask the questions if that's okay. So yeah, please post into the Q&A window. And Tracey, first technical question, if you could please, I don't know if you were about to do this, you probably were, just get your slideshow into presentation mode and then it will go full screen. That's the one. Thank you very much.
All right. So
Perfect.
thank you. Will I commence, Stuart? Okay. All right. So I too would like to be able to acknowledge country, even though I'm from University of Queensland. Today I am on the lands of in Naarm and pay my respect to the traditional owners here, but also give a shout out to the Kaurna community, because I did work at Flinders University for about 8 years in my career, and was not only myself but my daughter was well accepted. Maybe one of the first things that we could do and is name the country that we are all situated on. And for our international outside of Australia guests this morning, naming country is a really important aspect of being able to identify ourselves as Aboriginal with each other. So naming providing our names, our family connections, and our country. So thank you all for joining. This is I'll go through these slides. If you do use my work, can I just ask you to attribute that? And I'm hoping to be able to turn all of this into a publication by the end of semester 1. Thank you. All right, so these are the types of things that we're going to go through today. And I'm sure for some of you who have started your Indigenising Curriculum journey that you are also dealing with some of these matters. When we started this journey a number of years ago, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous and the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Teaching and Learning at the university saw fit to establish an Indigenising Curriculum working party. And so what we tried to do is draw from all of the faculties at that particular time and the expertise, either as associate deans academic or directors of teaching and learning, so that we had buy-in from across the university, because we did see this as a whole of university activity. So in terms of framing a philosophy around Indigenising curriculum, I look to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And one of the key objectives of the UNDRIP is to be able to provide an education for Aboriginal and for Indigenous people within the world, and for Indigenous people to be able to have their knowledges and cultures respected. And so that's a key framing for us at that international level. And then if we looked at what was happening at the national level, Indigenous leadership worked really closely with Universities Australia, and you can find these Indigenous strategies online. So the strategy that operated for 2022 to 25 really did seek for universities to be able to embed Indigenous content in the curricula, and to ensure that all students, not just Indigenous students, but all students leave the university with a greater awareness of Indigenous values and knowledges. And this becomes, I think, more critical for the type of world that we are living in at the moment. And then at our local level, we have our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Indigenous has embedded the Reconciliation Action Plan as key strategy within the university. And so our RAP from up until 2022 sought to embed Indigenous curriculum and inclusive teaching practices. And then more recently, we launched our stretch RAP, the next level RAP, and here we continue the focus on Indigenised curriculum through a number of deliverables. And so we've been at University of Queensland, we've been at this particular activity for approximately 4 years now, 5 years now. Now, I think I want to acknowledge, I'll just go back. I want to acknowledge that when we started this journey, and I was talking to people across the university, there was a real slippage in the language. So sometimes when we were talking, we were using the language of Indigenous perspectives. Others were using Indigenous knowledges. And I felt it was really important for us to be able to differentiate between that language so that we all had the same meaning when we were speaking to each other. So if we have a look, I'm going to start on the right-hand side. So if we have a look at Indigenous perspectives, this is the introduction of an Indigenised curriculum at a very small level within established courses. We use the language of courses and degrees, as courses and programs for subjects and degrees. And I've given some examples there. And so for people who were very anxious about commencing this journey, I was encouraging people to start off with an Indigenous perspective. And so, for example, if you were teaching Indigenous, if you were teaching art, you may do a couple of lectures on Indigenous art and, particular forms of Indigenous art. And that way, then people would gain their confidence, would be able to have time to search for the resources that they needed, develop their resources, and also start to develop their relationships with Indigenous people. At the University of Queensland, we have already established courses or subjects that for the whole of the semester, they focus on an Indigenised curriculum. And I give those examples down the bottom in the dark purple square. So we have, you have to be able to provide a core course in Indigenous education for the registration of classroom teachers. We created a course in Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people in the law. And we did that through an initiative of the university called Student Staff Project. So we worked with students of law to be able to develop that particular course. I'll talk a little bit more about what is happening in health. There was already an established course in Aboriginal archaeology. And in the area that I work in, we conduct a major and a minor in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander studies. So these, when we talk about Indigenous studies, we're talking about a whole of semester course. And then the other development within Indigenous studies is that it has evolved to critical Indigenous studies. And so rather than a focus on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, teaching about, it's more a decolonisation pedagogical approach. And then the last one on the left-hand side around Indigenous knowledges, I have made the claim that Indigenous knowledges are held by Indigenous people. And so therefore, if you are making the claim of teaching Indigenous knowledges, then you need to be teaching side by side with Indigenous people who are the holders of that particular knowledge. And so that's been a challenge within the university as well, because then it requires schools, discipline areas to be able to have those established relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And the university where I'm working is in the process of becoming better at being able to develop those relationships. This is a bit of a timeline for what we have been doing. So in 21, the key point there is that we set up the Indigenising Curriculum Working Party. In 2022, the key point there is that we drafted a set of principles for Indigenising curriculum. In 23, I realised that we can't do this without the library involved, so that academics can go to the library and be able to access the resources that they need. And we developed a green paper. And then, oops, sorry, too fast, fingers too fast in the morning. And then we moved to set up a subcommittee of that, in brackets, CAPP is the Committee for Academic Programs and Policy. And that feeds back into the academic board. So we set in place a governance structure. Okay. The Deputy Vice Chancellor, Indigenous, myself, Caitlin Barney, who's one of our team, plus other representatives from Indigenous representatives from other universities, AAUT universities. We were successful in gaining a what was then called a NESHI, a national, give me time here, National Centre for Studies in Equity and Higher Education grant out of Curtin University. And we were looking at Indigenous student success. And so you can see the comments there from Indigenous students about what they were learning within the curriculum, or more accurately, what wasn't in the curriculum for them. And we held to a position that it was really important for Indigenous students to be able to see themselves within the curriculum. And that was also impetus for the way in which we were developing the work that we were doing. Before I commenced this work, I engaged in consultation with all of the Indigenous academic staff across the university. And we had a number of consultations before I put any pen to paper and started working with our Teaching and Learning Institute. And there were a number of things, I think, that were really quite critical for the way in which we were going forward. So one of the things that the Indigenous academic staff were adamant about was appropriate remuneration for any Indigenous staff, Indigenous members of the community who came into the university and were teaching side by side. And the other thing that they called for was a high-level set of principles as well. So that got us thinking about, the way in which we were going to structure the work. So apart from being a professor for Indigenous education, in my spare time, I got to be a bit of an artist and created this diagram. I did a desktop search of what was happening within other universities. And whilst those universities at the time I was looking had also set up a number of principles, I was really interested that no one had centered country. I thought that was really important to be able to center country. And I want to acknowledge too that there is intersection with these principles, with the some of the values of the university, particularly in respect to truth and respect and relationships. So I'll just take you through these principles now. So when we talk about who we are as Indigenous people, country is really a lot of the Australian audience, and particularly the Indigenous audience online at the moment, will be used to the language of country. For international people, country is that ontologically defined tracts of land which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are connected to. So when I say that I am a Ngugi Waka Waka woman, Ngugi through my matrilineal line and Waka Waka through my patrilineal line, that connects me to a particular tract of land, which is inherited ontologically and by birth. So that notion of country becomes very, very important within the development of Indigenised curriculum. And we need to be able to share our way of being and speaking and knowing so that the non-Indigenous part of the community can pick up on that as well. So one of the things that we need to be able to shift within the university is those relationships that are characterized by only a transaction. And that has tended to be the way in which the wider university interacts with Indigenous people. And I say this to you, and it may sound very hard, but the reality for Indigenous people is that those transactional relationships are exhausting. Our numbers are small within the university compared to non-Indigenous people. And when we are asked by non-Indigenous people to provide knowledge or to do something or be present, that can be very taxing upon our work. And so it becomes, the university becomes a site where perhaps we're working to everybody else's agenda and not our own agenda. And I worry about those types of relationships when they're transactional, because without even knowing it, non-Indigenous people are replicating a colonial relationship with us. And I think it's 2025 and we need to move beyond that. Okay, respect. In the university, what has tended to happen is that one knowledge has been dominant. And so we need to be able to make space for other knowledge systems. If a university engages in acknowledging country, then part of that is to be able to acknowledge the knowledge that comes from that country, to be truthful and sincere in its acknowledgement of Indigenous people. And in that educative sense, that's what respect will mean for us. Very aware that we are starting perhaps at a low level in terms of cultural capability for non-Indigenous people to work in this space. And so we need to be able to have the training necessarily available for people. And I will talk to you about that so that people start to feel confident. Because often, when I started this journey, often the discussion was, Tracey, I don't want to make a mistake. And I think that is really good that you don't want to make a mistake, but it does take work on behalf of non-Indigenous people to be able to move to that state of confidence. And remember, in the background to all of this is our students not seeing themselves within the curriculum. All right. Part and principle of the way in which I was brought up as an Aboriginal person was in relationships, there must always be reciprocity. So that will be the counter to relationships that are transactional. So if you are asking of Indigenous people within your curriculum, what is it that you are able to give in return? And I'll talk to you about that a little bit further as well. Truth, okay. Truth is that mechanism that will be able to give some sincerity and authenticity to the quality of relationships and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And there are multiple benefits, not only for Indigenous students who can see themselves in the curriculum, but also for non-Indigenous, the teachers as well as the students. When we started off, we started to do a little bit of mapping. We focused that within the humanities and social sciences. What we are going to do now, because we've stepped down that journey a whole lot further, is we're going to look to map the university. This becomes really critical, particularly for those academics who are feeling a little bit tenuous about stepping into this space. If we can do that mapping, then they will be able to see what's happening in other parts of the university and how people are approaching an Indigenised curriculum. And they'll have some tools then to be able to start off on their journey. Okay, some case studies that are happening within the university. The School of Political Science and International Studies, they're situated that they do have Indigenous staff there, and they have Indigenous HDR students as well. And so that relationship was built over a very long time. And I think School of Political Science was clever in a long time ago, in the sense that they work with one of our elders, scholar elders, and that is Mary Graham. And so the school made a decision to be able to have 10% of their readings within their courses. And that's their little booklet, and we share that throughout the university. So you can see the impact that, you can see the way in which they've developed that over time. The other case study is in medicine, where traditional bushford garden was made available on one of our hospital campus, and that garden is used in teaching. And the other case study, through the process of that initiative within the university, where you have student staff partnerships, a number of modules were developed in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. You can see that on the right-hand side. As a result of those modules, what is happening in the university now is all of those programs, those degrees that are, what do they call them? Allied health degrees. The students enrolled in those courses need to be able to complete those modules before they graduate. And that will give them a cultural capability preparedness for the work that they will be undertaking in the future. Okay, this is our graduate attribute. We have 6 graduate attributes, but I just wanted particularly to identify the attribute that talks to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Indigenising curriculum for us. And the clarification down the bottom is to show that it's not only talking about First Nations people within Australia, but it allows the teaching staff to go global as well. So I want to give the example of a young academic within the School of Engineering who is teaching in the course named Ethical Engineering. Use the example of Yukon Gorge in Australia, and then also gave an example for Sri Lanka as well. So what we do have now, and here I have to acknowledge the work done at Charles Sturt University, where they had set up, they had embedded a committee within the university that gave approval to Indigenous, Indigenised curriculum work throughout the university. So what we have established is this Indigenous Learning Subcommittee. The purpose of the Indigenous Learning Subcommittee is not only to address Indigenised curriculum, but it's also looking at Indigenous student success. So that's just been recently established, and we kickstarted our meetings this year. And as I said before, it's a subcommittee of CAP, our Committee for Academic Programs and Policy, and then CAP reports to the university. And what we have done within the subcommittee, so that we're responsive to not only new courses, but academic program review, where it is a requirement within the university to report on Indigenised curriculum, is that we've made a little working group so that faculty and schools can contact that working group for advice going forward with their submission for academic program review, or even in the development of Indigenised curriculum. So this is what it looks like. HASS is Humanities and Arts and Social Sciences. HMBS is Health, Medicine and Behavioural Sciences. EAT is Engineering, Architecture and IT, Science, and the last one, BEL, is Business, Economics and Law. So if we start at this diagram at the bottom, so at school and faculty level, we should have something that equates to a working group, or here I'm calling it a steering committee. So, and most schools have something set up.
Millie.
Hello? Oh. Okay, so HAS and Health, Medicine and Behavioural Sciences, they are the 2 faculties that have moved to appoint an Associate Dean Indigenous. The other 3 faculties are moving to that area, but it's that Indigenous leadership. It is that Indigenous leadership that has. I can hear some
Apologies, I've just muted the person. If you could all make sure your mics muted.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Sorry, Tracy, carry on.
No, you're right. So, so they've got that senior Indigenous leadership, and I'll give the example of health, medicine, and behavioural sciences. The ADI there, Associate Dean Indigenous, she set up a wisdom council. And so she's drawn from not only the Indigenous community within the university, but external to the university to provide advice to the faculty. And then they also have an Indigenising Curriculum steering committee as well. Their work then feeds up to faculty boards, and then faculty boards move their information up to, if they want to interact with us at the subcommittee level, before they then take it back up to CAP and then onto academic board. So it was really important to be able to embed that in structurally within the university. One of the other things that we do for academics, we have a regular community of practice. I work very closely with the Institute of Teaching and Learning Innovation. They are responsible for facilitating this community of practice. At these fora, we discuss best practice across the university. We showcase some initiatives. It helps build the infrastructure around Indigenising curriculum, and it just gives our teaching staff that confidence to be able to move forward. So these are some of the resources that we have commenced developing. I led this one with the RAP team and with students. This is a press book. The University of Queensland has got the rights to develop press books. So this is the language of relationships, and it gives staff what I would think is grounding knowledge. What's the difference between an acknowledgement and a welcome? Why is it important for relationships to be not transactional? Why is reciprocity really important within Indigenous culture? So that is available for teaching staff. The university library has a wonderful young team of Indigenous staff, and they have created these learning modules. So UQ has a Black history, and they reference Black as BLAK from Destiny Deacon's work, our well-known Indigenous artist. But if you do nothing else, then use this within your course. So it gives it genuinely does give a Black history of the university, warts and all. Caitlin and I have been doing the podcast series. What we have done with those podcasts is we've focused on a principle of Indigenising curriculum, as you can see on the right-hand side, whether it's respect or country or truth or reciprocity. And what we have tried to do too is look at where in the university Indigenous people are working with non-Indigenous people around Indigenising curriculum. So if you look at episode 14 with Sonia and Greg, Greg is Indigenous, and they work in the area of urban planning. And so where that has been possible, we've tried to ensure that, you know, we're showing the teams that are working in the university. And I'm not quite sure if you've had a chance to tune in, but it's also disciplinary knowledge as well. So episode 2, James, Kath, and Morgan, they were responsible in political science, in putting that booklet together, where they made the commitment that 10% of the articles that they are using will be Indigenous. Episode 4, I got Carol and Kelly. They're talking within the space of architecture. Episode 13, Vidya, I talked about her work in ethical engineering. And episode 20, the fabulous Professor Enita Heiss, talking about the work that she does, the writing that she does, and how it can be used in curriculum. At the university, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, in negotiation with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, purchased the license for these cultural learning modules. There's 10 of them. And we have set the first 3 modules for staff to complete within their training. We are making the 10 modules available, and we're working that out at the moment for semester 2 through our Indigenous Learning Subcommittee, and informing and providing a guide for the way in which these modules can be used in teaching and learning. By the end of the semester, by the end of the semester, we will also have a handbook for Indigenising Curriculum. You can see the launch date there, and you can see the disciplines that are going to contribute. At the moment, we have 15 chapters that we are contributing, and we see this handbook as particularly helpful for commencing academics, learning designers, practitioners within this field who are starting off on their journey. And I just want to share this with you. We really focused on enablers at the very beginning of our work. And you can see how some of this has come from the consultations with the Indigenous academic staff. Let's start with human resources. It's yellow and it sits at about 10 o'clock on the dial there. The problematic here is if you are saying you're working in Indigenous knowledges and you're working with Indigenous community and you are working with an elder or a senior knowledge holder, what rate of payment should we provide somebody who holds that respected position within the community that you're working with? You know, and I don't think it should be, you know, just the casual lecturer rate. I think we need to be able to align the value of somebody's knowledge within the community and the position that they held with the senior knowledge holders that we have within the university. So an elder and a senior knowledge holder for me should be paid at a, you know, professorial rate if they're working shoulder to shoulder with you. Want to go to the red one. I think that we'd say that it's about 4 o'clock on the dial, the Higher Education Academy credentialing. Before I spoke about reciprocity in the relationship. So one of the ways that we can pay respects in a meaningful way, and give back to those who work with us from the community is to provide higher education academy credentials for Indigenous people. And Italy and the work of Deanne Ganaway within Italy is working exactly on that at the moment. And we have support from HEA. HEA is international, to do this work so that any Indigenous person who comes into the university and teaches can have that credential, which I think is a really important way to be able to reciprocate and be respectful. Finances, some people in the university have got greater flexibility than the others, but I think if you're going to commence in this journey, I think you need to be sitting down with, school and faculty heads, business managers, and saying, this is the work that we want to do. So, for example, in science at University of Queensland, the students do field work. That costs. They do it on country, and they do it with Indigenous rangers on country. They go to Gari, Fraser Island. And so all of that was worked out beforehand. And so I think you need to, so that the school and faculty are aware that this is business as usual and money should be made available for that sort of work. And the last one I want to give a plug for, which sits at about 6 or 7 on the dial, 6, 7 o'clock on the dial, is scholarship. We need to be writing about the work that we are doing in the university. There's a dearth of that, and we need to build that based on Indigenising curriculum across the country. So thank you. That's me. And I'll hand over to Stuart.
Thank you so much, Tracey. That was amazing. There's so much in there to think about. We really, really appreciate your time this morning, and I'm sure everyone's giving you a round of applause right now. We have about 10 minutes left, but there are a few questions. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you, those who have posted questions in the Q&A window, to just ask your questions to Tracey directly. So if we look at the most upvoted one, we have Aaron. Aaron, are you there with your 2 questions? Feel free to turn on your mic and cam and ask Tracey the questions. If not, I will ask them for you. Okay, so Aaron has asked, Tracey, what have you observed / experienced in the area of Indigenising the assessment, and correspondingly, if there are implications on training staff to mark such students' work?
This is this is a really good question, and it's one that we're developing, the discussion at the university at the moment. And I think that type of question also needs to be considered within the discipline that you're teaching as well. And I suppose it's complicated by the fact whether or not we're using Indigenous knowledge to be able to frame that assessment type as well. And so I can't answer that question specifically, but I would think that they are some of the considerations. And I think ultimately what ends up happening, Aaron, is there is an alignment between the non-Indigenous practice of assessment and, taking on board Indigenous aspects to inform that assessment.
We also asked, will involving Indigenous people from industry be appropriate to teach alongside non-Indigenous academic staff for the week that Indigenous curriculum is taught?
For sure. if there is a weakness within the university, it does not have enough relationships with Indigenous people. And one of the sessions that we did in the communities of practice, because this is a very fair question, well, how do I start developing those relationships with Indigenous people? And our colleague who lectures in science, Associate Professor Steve Salisbury, he said, I picked up the phone and
Yeah.
started talking to Indigenous community about whether or not um, this is something that the community would be interested in, bringing the students up to Gari, up to Fraser Island, and working with the
Oh
rangers.
my gosh, that's great.
Because the field he's in is environmental
And
science.
everybody make sure their mics are on mute. Thank you very much. Thanks. It was great, Tracy. Now, the next question is from Pauline Golder. Are you there, Pauline?
Yes, yep.
Hi, we can hear you fine.
Just Tracey, there's been a wealth of all this effort you guys are putting in, all this knowledge that you've gained, and looking at all those links on your PowerPoint, I was just wondering if we could have a copy of those links so that we can go into some of these things further if possible.
Pauline, would it be all right if I wrote this in an article, and I will have it finished by the end of the year because I want to be able to put it into the handbook. I'll come back to Stuart, give him the link to the handbook because it will be a press book with the university, and then it'll be available for everyone who participated today. And so, it'll be all those voices who are doing work at the moment within the university.
Yeah, because that's one of the ones I was interested in, is that handbook. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
We'll
Thanks
make
very
that.
much.
We'll make through Stuart. Stuart, is that all right? I'm
Yeah,
giving
that's
you
no
work.
problem at all. I'll have the mailing list for all the people here, so that I'm sure we'll appreciate that. Thank you,
Okay.
Tracy. Okay, the next most popular question is Maddie Perrott. Are you there, Maddie?
I am. Hello,
Hi,
can you hear me? Thank you so much, Tracy. That was fantastic. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide is soon to be merged into one big university. Yes. We've got a recently very newly established community of practice in our law school, which is focused on Aboriginal ways of knowing in the law. I was just wondering what advice you'd give to a very newly established community of practice, which it is also my belief that it is entirely non-Indigenous academics involved in that at the moment.
Okay. I'm the sort of teacher and have always been that sort of teacher. I can't teach unless I know what the resources are. And so as an undergrad, as a postgrad, I made intimate, intimate friendships with those people in the library. And doing this work around Indigenising curriculum, one of the things that I realised, in spite of the fact, and I suppose the prompt for me was from the School of Politics and Social Sciences, is that I went, oh my God, I've been taking it for granted that everybody would know who is an Indigenous author, but that's not the case. And so I needed to be able to develop that relationship with the library so that they could set up the resources in such a way that we identify who are the Indigenous authors of materials for academic staff. And in one of the things that the library, the UQ library, is doing through the Indigenous team is not only identifying Indigenous authors, but they're also identifying the country. So they're using a different classificatory system to be able to mark the resources. In law, I understood that there was a national committee of Indigenous law academics working on Indigenised curriculum. And so I would be talking to, and she may not like this, that I'm going to dob her in, but go to Marcel Burns at University of Technology, Sydney, because I had thought Marcel was driving that for law academics. Okay, so make sure that you've got that relationship happening with the library, because as teachers, we need those resources. Make sure that you do your fundamental research so that you know what is out there already within your discipline. And with your communities of practice, make sure that you've got a plan that you want to be able to achieve. What's your goal? What's your goal for 2025 as a community of practice, and how are you going to get there? And who do you need to help you get there to your goal? Can I tell you, I know Karen Shepherd is online, and she's a staff member. She's a senior learning designer and mentors our Indigenous learning designer, and works shoulder to shoulder with her. Can I say I wouldn't have been able to do any of this work unless I was working with our Teaching and Learning Institute. They've been really critical for bringing the change within the university. Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracey. Quick question from Kath Attree. Are you there, Kath?
Yes, I am. Hi, Tracey. It was thank you for sharing. It was a beautifully thought out approach. I really love the way you have those principles connected all the way through. I guess one of the challenges is always with the graduate attribute, ensuring that students actually attain that when they graduate from the university. So I was just curious as to what work is being done around that.
Nothing yet. Okay. We have we need to, I suppose when you start this journey too, you need to be able to have that I suppose it's like research behind it, so that you've got the data and you can check in on those sorts of things.
Yeah, and you're getting the buy-in from the academic and betting the whole process. So it's a sort of like a progressive approach.
What we do have within the university is an opportunity to have to compete for teaching and learning grants.
Mm-hmm.
And we, in the first instance, exercise that within our own major and minor within Indigenous studies, to see what the students were getting out of that based on the pedagogical approach of storying, because I write in that particular area. And that was really hopeful for us that we were doing the right thing. We've received another grant, and that will be finished at the end of the semester. But we're actually working with those discipline areas where there is an absence of Indigenized curriculum. So, we're working in spaces like music, and some of the hard sciences, to be able to give support, but also kickstart them on their journey and give them the confidence.
Yes.
So those sorts of projects we do try and feed back in, but your question is very relevant for all of us to check in as students are on the way out, to see whether or not that graduate attribute has been achieved. And Kath, can I just also say, I don't want to be, Pollyanna about this as well, because we live in very, very troubling times. The pushback, even on an acknowledgement of country.
Yeah.
The pushback about toxic masculinities within our class. And even that real conservatism about why are we focusing on this anyway. And certainly that was a young part of my younger career, where there was real pushback. particularly from students. And, for those of us who are older and have a little bit of grey in our hair, we will remember the time when CCATs, student evaluation instruments, were used as weapons against us in terms of teaching. But yeah, I think you've raised something. Karen's online. Karen, we'll have to go back and we'll have to put some focus and attention on Kath's question as well. So thanks, Kath.
Sorry, one more. So with the podcasts, somebody posted a link to them in the chat. Can we share them widely? So, for example, I have a newsletter that goes out with about Indigenous curriculum in higher education every month. I'd love to include those in the newsletter, or would you prefer for us to wait until you're...
No, they're already out there. They're on Podbean, they're out there. Caitlin, my colleague, my non-Indigenous colleague, she dragged me into that space. Can I just say I wasn't really confident about going into that space. Me and technology don't go together. It's an absolute bloody miracle that all of this worked this morning and I was at the helm. But I'm really glad that Caitlin did take me. We've published about it as well. And I think it's been really, really important part of the infrastructure in getting non-Indigenous colleagues to act in the space. They hear the voices of others working in that space.
Thank you, Tracey.
No, thank you.
So
Kath.
we've actually hit the end of our time, but if you don't mind, Tracey, would you mind taking a couple more questions for those that are still with us?
Sure.
Okay, we have Rosetta. Are you with us, Rosetta? You have a question there.
Yes, I am. Thank you very
Rosetta.
much. Thanks,
for
Stuart.
staying.
Thanks very much, Tracey. You talked about not making it only one voice, and I'm at the University of Canberra, and we follow Yunka Porter's 8 Ways of Learning, and like without only just doing that one there, if I know that people are saying, we don't like it, but I want to engage with the community, how do I do it? How do I engage with the community to hear what Indigenous teachers are saying about it? Is it reflecting them? Would they use all of it, none of it, some of it? Where do I start? I've just been looping around and I can't get any traction on that.
I thought at the University of Canberra you did have Indigenous people, particularly in the School of Education. I presented at University of Canberra last year because, I used to work there. I mean, I presented in the area of research.
Yeah.
But I also thought that the University of Canberra had engaged an elder as well. So it might be worthwhile going back to university management.
Yeah.
And checking in with the Indigenous people that they've already got relationships with.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
remember. Look, and there is real critique out there
Yeah.
about Yunka Porter's work.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to have a look at Lester Irabina Rigney's work from South Australia?
Lester Irabina Rigney.
Irabina, IRAB. I'll write it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Great. Okay.
He talks about culturally nourishing schools, I think, and Kevin Lowe's work as well.
Thank you.
Who talks about culturally responsive schools. And both of their work comes out of ARCs.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much,
All right.
Tracey. All the best.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hey, we have a question from Justine Hamilton. Are you there, Justine?
Yep, I
There.
am, and it might be too big of a excuse me, of a question for the time we have. So if it is, feel free to give me an alternate source. I'm wondering about the Indigenous definition of knowledge, because I am acutely aware that evidence published for decades has a definite Western bias to it. And so when we're talking about other cultural applications, we sometimes talk about what is knowledge versus what is sort of historical traditional culture. One example, a bit of an extreme example, being that in some cultures, women are viewed as having fewer human rights than men. And so what is knowledge versus what is traditional culture, and what is the Indigenous perspective on the definition of knowledge?
Okay, so as with non-Indigenous society, I don't reckon there would be one particular perspective on Indigenous knowledge. And if you think about Stuart posting the Indigenous interpretation, that map of Australia, you will see that there are many Indigenous cultural positions around knowledge. In terms of scholarship, you might want to have a look at Aileen Moulton Robinson's work. Are you familiar with her?
No.
She is our seminal scholar in Australia. If you don't know Aileen's work, I'll put her name in the chat. Okay.
Got it. Yep.
And particularly her recent work, I think, was interrogating the trajectory of knowledge within non-Indigenous ways, and how that it butts up against Indigenous knowledge, which not to speak for Aileen, but in my own consideration of what is knowledge. Knowledge is ontological. It is a cultural tradition. It is a practice. It's embodied. It's, all of that. And it's generated across the generations. Of course, there's a real threat now, even for us, about the way in which and whether or not that practice can be maintained. On my worst days, I get very angry about social media and its penchant for individualism. I mean, I think that's undermining, one of the core essentials of Indigenous knowledge, in that it is collectively held and owned at various stages within your life. But yeah, go to Aileen's work and see what. And of course, you've got when it comes to the rebut of colonization, you've got Linda Two-Way-Smith's work around decolonisation, which is not only epistemological, it's also pedagogical for the work that we do within Indigenising Curriculum. So that's you could start there, Justin.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
That's a great place to start. Okay, a couple more quick ones. Margaret Faulkner, are you still with us, Margaret?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Margaret, how are you?
Not too bad. Mine, hopefully, I think the comment later on made about the library, knowing who was an Indigenous, creator of work, might have answered that. So it was mainly just like, even with our internal thing, we do have some Indigenous staff members in the discipline I'm in, but there's one of them. And so rather than put pressure on them and stopping their early career research progression, we probably do nothing. Back to that, not feeling confident of doing it without someone like that. So having a knowledge of where there has been work done that might just be basic concepts that we could incorporate and acknowledge, and then hopefully over time build something a bit more.
Yeah. And that for those who are really anxious about stepping into this space, Margaret, that's what I suggest. Baby steps, before you start, do what political science did at University of Queensland. Gather the resources, know who, is Indigenous and speaking in this space, but then if they're local, start to develop a relationship with those people, and bring them into the teaching, but also too, have in mind that principle of reciprocity, so that you can enact that as well. So it's not take all the time. But
And yeah,
baby steps. Don't know where to start? Baby steps.
but I suppose my bigger question was, we're all taking these baby steps, and rather than all of us going to the one person, I know we can do stuff probably in the new AU, but across Australia, if there was something that maybe those libraries can tap into, I just feel like there's a lot of work maybe being done and then gets lost and gets repeated. And maybe you need to repeat it because of the differences that go across the country, but there might be some, I don't know, if any investment to try and make up a portal of this is, best practice, have a look here rather than starting right from scratch.
I agree with you, Margaret. The impetus for this has waxed and waned over time. But I work from the premise that academic staff are clever. They know how to research. So research within your discipline to find what has been, update your information, start to make those connections, build, ask questions, make sure, you ask questions, amongst your colleagues as well, across disciplines and, working with your library and if you've got something equivalent to the Teaching and Learning Institute. I am pretty sure, I'm pretty confident that, as a result of all universities signing up to that Universities Australia Indigenous strategy, they are committed to doing something.
Thank you. That's a positive way to end for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
That's
Tracey.
all right.
We have one question left before we go. David McNaughton, are you still with us, David?
I certainly am.
Hi,
Thank
David.
you, Stuart. Tracey, wonderful talk. I really do appreciate it. This was very informative for me. My question's just a little bit, it's more because it's relevant to me at the moment, but this intersection with doing some research with community, trying to embed some Indigenised curriculum as well, and working with community, and this idea of intellectual property, particularly cultural intellectual property, and how that intersects within the university system that has quite strong grips on intellectual property, and how to kind of navigate when you see some misalignment with things with data sovereignty, especially working with Indigenous peoples.
Yeah. The goddess for me around ICIP is Terry Jenke and the work she did for the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. And I think what we have to do with our research officers is make sure, research officers have to be compliant with the receipt of their Indigenous monies from the Commonwealth. And one of those expectations is that they have an Indigenous research strategy. So if your university doesn't have a Indigenous research strategy, and it is not saying anything about ICIP and Indigenous data sovereignty, I would be getting a collective together and setting up a meeting with the DVCR and saying, this needs to happen. The
That's very helpful.
university is supposed to have these things. They have to be compliant around these things. And David, if you do that, welcome to my world and Bronwyn's world, where we sometimes feel like little ants biting the leg of an elephant, but we're persistent to be able to bring that change. All right?
No, that's very helpful, especially with those resources where I can go in with these meetings a little bit more. This is the standard.
This is
Yep.
this is the standard. This
Yep.
is the standard. This is the work that Terry Jenke did. Terry is a lawyer. This is her legal firm that was commissioned by the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, and this is what we should be doing. And in terms of Indigenous data sovereignty, have a look at Ray Lovett. He comes out of the field of health and he's at ANU. Okay?
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
All right.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Tracey. And I think that's the end of all the questions. And just another huge thank you to you, Tracey. That was fascinating. I think a lot of people were really inspired by what you had to say. And
Okay, thank you very much.
everybody's mind ticking over. And
Yeah,
I thank you so much for taking the extra time to answer those questions. That's really appreciated.
that's fine.
So great to have you, Tracey. Very appreciative, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye. Have a
Thank
great
you very
day.
much. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks. Have a good one.